Welcome back to Autism Actually Speaking. I'm Nathan Selove.
And I'm Ramon Selove.
And today we are going to be talking about savants, which is something that's often associated with autism. And we wanted to talk about this because I I feel like there's some misconceptions and stereotypes and also some aspects of the concept of being a savant that I think gets a little bit complicated. So before
Sometimes, yeah, go ahead.
before we get started, let's just give a definition of what a savant actually is, because most people probably think of savant as like, oh, super genius, smart person, and you kind of have an idea. But let's go ahead and nail down a concrete definition. So this is from the American Psychological Association. Um, a savant is it's a noun, which I guess of course it is. Um, a person who demonstrates exceptional, usually isolated cognitive abilities such as rapid calculation, identifying the day of the week for any given date, or musical talent, especially with an individual with a mental or neurodevelopmental disorder, such as intellectual developmental disorder or autism spectrum disorder. The outdated term idiot savant initially was used to denote someone or to denote such a person, but has been disregarded as offensive. I can't imagine why.
So when I was a kid, that's the term that we used. Idiot savant is someone who was an idiot. An idiot at that time wasn't just an epithet, it had a specific IQ definition.
Yeah.
Um, but who was really smart about some particular isolated things. So there were calendar savants and musical savants and um, uh, math savants.
Yeah. And I think that the big example that I think a lot of people think about when they think of like an autistic savant would probably be Rain Man. Like the savant is the person who's able to make complex mathematical calculations in their head just like that.
Yeah.
Um,
So Rain Man is one that people might know. Um, in media, Good Doctor is a savant. If anyone knows John Elder Robinson, who I actually met and talked to at a seminar once, he's really fun. Um, he he could picture electronic circuits in his mind and design them. He could just listen to some rock stars in Kiss or Pink Floyd or what have you, and these these half literate uh, rock stars would explain to him what sound effect they wanted, and he could just design it in his head, put the circuits together on a desktop in the hotel room, and then deliver it on stage for their performance the next day. It was amazing stuff that he could do.
yeah.
Um, Partly because of the prevalence of these media images of savants. Some people got this idea that all autistics were savants. So
Yeah.
in your famous service dog video, you had some of the things that people said about your service dog. Oh, you're
Yeah.
autistic, you must be really good at math. Or, oh, you're autistic, you must be really organized. And,
Then pan to my desk, which is a pigsty.
and it's this whole savant thing is sort of a mixed blessing.
Yeah.
It's good that people in the public finally started to recognize that autistics might have unique capabilities. Um, but when they start expecting that and you can't deliver,
Yeah.
um, or another thing was, sometimes we would be talking at conferences to parents whose autistic child was nonverbal,
Yeah.
and they would essentially be dismissive of anything that we had to say because we were savants and we just didn't understand what it's like for someone like their child who is not. And that always made me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I always had this idea, and part of it comes from my background as a professor of anatomy and physiology, studying the brain and how the brain works. Brain tissue doesn't just sit idle. Brains are just hungry to do things. And if they don't, if a part of the brain that ordinarily does one thing can't do that thing, it doesn't just twiddle its thumbs, it
Yeah.
does something else.
Yeah.
Um, some of the some of the examples of this that most people are probably familiar with are things that have to do with sensory deprivation. A
Yeah.
There's a huge part of the back of the brain, the occipital lobe, that interprets visual information. But not everybody gets visual information. Some people are blind. And if that part of the brain doesn't get any visual input, it doesn't just not do anything, it borrows sensory input from some other channel and then analyzes it the way that it can analyze things. So, um, people who are blind will frequently end up analyzing sound, but in a visual way, where they make three-dimensional maps of the world around them
Yeah.
out of sound instead of vision. But it's the same part of the brain that's doing it. This is a skill that would seem like a savant skill,
Yeah.
except that it's just a normal thing.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that is a joke among autistics sometimes is we talk about these poor dear neurotypicals who are constantly plagued with sensory input that is they're trying to interpret, um, how whether other people like them, what other people think of them, all this social nonsense that they're just overwhelmed with. It's a wonder they can ever think of anything, being
Yeah.
overwhelmed with all that socialism stuff. Socialism, that's
Socialism.
not the word. What? Wait, what's the right word? Socializing? I don't know. Anyway,
Socializing,
what's the
which
difference between socializing and socialism?
I mean, I mean, you can still use like the term socializing to talk about. So I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
you
okay.
we
In any case, uh, it seems like such a horrible disability to us to be overwhelmed with that all the time. Um, I think a lot of us who are autistic and who don't use the parts of our brain that are normally interpreting social signals for social signals, those parts of the brain aren't just empty, they do something else with that information. And sometimes the something else that we do is wonderful.
yeah,
Um,
like I've talked about the idea of autistic superpowers on this channel
yeah,
before, and I savant being a savant is kind of like that, but like on steroids. Um, so I think that most people who are on the autism spectrum that I've met, like not all, I don't want to generalize. Like this is based on my experience, and I know a lot of autistics, you know. But most that I've met have had some type of special skill or special set of skills that
mhm.
might not rise to the level of savant, but is still like really impressive. I would not consider myself a savant. Um, I think that I would consider you a savant, Dad. Um,
So I would consider you a savant. Um, but I think of savant skills maybe a little differently than a lot of other people do. I think the way the general public thinks of savant skills is this. All right, so everybody's brain, human brains are magnificent and they do magnificent things. If your brain does essentially the same magnificent things that everybody else's brain does, then you don't consider that anything special.
yeah.
If you can't do something that other people think of as pretty simple, but you can do something else, then you might be thought of as a savant. I remember meeting a mathematician at Ohio State who had been, he'd actually been retired. He was a professor emeritus and had been for a long time before I met him. He was a brilliant mathematician. Um, Long after he retired, he was still showing up on his exact same schedule every day. The department secretary had to meet him at the front door because he couldn't find his office.
Hmm.
And
Yikes.
she would take him to his office. And, being able to find your office, this is a guy who went to the same office for, Jesus Christ, it was probably 50 years. Um, he couldn't find his way to his office.
Hmm.
Now, most people would think of that as not savant, but that wasn't what he did with his brain. He did something else.
Yeah.
This guy could solve mathematical problems that had been posed hundreds of years ago and never solved, and he would look at them and solve them. He did amazing things. And because he was able to publish the things that he did, and there was an audience of people who could really appreciate how brilliant it was, he was considered a savant.
Hmm.
But if the things that he did, if he had no way of communicating them to other people, or if he could communicate them, but there was nobody around who was actually smart enough to understand it,
Yeah.
then he would have just been considered an idiot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, the difference to me between an idiot and a savant is, does our society have the capability of recognizing the thing you're good at as being valuable?
Yeah. And this goes back to discussions that I've had in the past about the idea of the social model,
Yeah.
basically how I'm something becomes a disability not based on whether or not that thing in and of itself is limiting, but if it's limiting because of how society is framed, right? Because of how society is built. If society was not built to accommodate something, then it becomes disabling. If society is built to accommodate something, then it's less disabling. I mean, like, one of the examples that I
And
often use is
and
glasses.
and
Like,
if society is set up in such a way that it richly rewards something in particular, then you're a savant.
yeah, yeah. So, like, the example I'll often use is like glasses. You know, usually, uh, like what I often do is I'll ask my students, because I teach a class in disability rhetoric. I ask my students, raise your hand if you wear glasses or contacts, and usually like half the class raises their hand, and then I'll say, okay, raise your hand if you consider yourself disabled because of that, and like everybody puts their hands down because they don't consider that a disability. It's an impairment, but they don't consider it a disability because it's something that's so easily accommodated through glasses or contacts. That's just a standard part of growing up. You go to the nurse, you test your eye, you see if you need glasses. If you do, you get that prescription, boom, you're good. Like, it's something that's so easily accommodated. Um, so so that's
And
that's that's kind of
and
what
let
we mean
me
by social model. And then when we're
and
talking
let me
about
say some
savants,
and let me say something about autism and accommodation. One of the things that I have witnessed during my lifetime is the invention and proliferation of computers and the internet.
Yeah.
And there are many things about the internet that do an excellent job of accommodating some of the shortcomings that autistics have socially. And so, in many ways, computers have almost become the glasses for people with autism. It's not quite as good as
Yeah.
that yet, but
Yeah.
it's pretty damn close.
Well, it helps because like when you're typing stuff on computers, you can only use words. And like even if you do use emojis or emoticons, like those are a lot easier to read, if you're an autistic. Like, if you tell me colon and parenthesis like means like you see that it means smile. You see that and it's like, okay, well I know that that's a good thing. This person's happy. Like, you know, or
It
like it's easy to see a frowny face or a smiley face. You don't have to try to figure out the nuances of the face. It's a language that's a lot easier for autistics to understand.
it makes those emotional things um, it it makes them explicit,
Yeah.
and that's really the autistic problem in the first place, is not noticing the implicit things. But computer culture has tended to make those things explicit, and that just makes it so much easier.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so that's all we have time for this week. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a like, a share, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment down below. Let us know what you thought about the video. Let us know what your thoughts are on the concept of savants. Are you a savant? Do you know a savant? Let us know. And
So let me just give a final thought on that.
okay.
In my conception of it, everybody, autistic, neurotypical, whatever, everybody is a savant. And if you aren't recognizing that someone is a savant, it's because you're missing something. Their brain is doing something amazing. And if you can't see it, it's because you haven't seen it. It's there.
Hmm. Interesting. So comment your thoughts on that down below. And once again, thank you so much for watching, and you will see us in the next one.